The air in the opulent dining room was thick with the scent of roasted lamb, and the unspoken tension of a family gathering that always felt more like a corporate audit. My mother-in-law, Diane, a woman whose smile rarely reached her eyes, moved with a practiced grace around the polished mahogany table. She paused beside my chair, a crystal goblet in her hand, her back momentarily shielding her actions from the general view. I was ostensibly admiring the ornate chandelier, but my peripheral vision caught the telltale glint of a small, discreet vial. Without a flicker of hesitation, a single, clear drop, then two, fell into the crimson liquid of the drink intended for me. The movement was swift, almost imperceptible, a magician's trick of misdirection. Special cocktail for my favorite son-in-law, Julian, she purred, her voice sweet as artificial sweetener, her smile, as always, not quite reaching the calculating glint in her eyes. I met her gaze, a perfectly modulated expression of gratitude on my face. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. This wasn't the first time Diane's favors had felt less like generosity and more like veiled assertions of control. But this felt different, more clinical. "Thank you, Diane," I replied, my voice calm, almost too calm. As I reached for the glass, my hand brushed hers. I felt a faint tremor, a fleeting vulnerability that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Just then, Gerald, my father-in-law, a man whose presence filled a room with the suffocating scent of old money and thinly veiled contempt, grumbled about the stock market from the head of the table. He was already halfway through his own drink, a heavy, bottomed whiskey tumbler. It was a split-second decision, a desperate gamble based on instinct. "Gerald, sir," I said, my tone respectful, almost deferential. "This lamb is quite rich. Might I offer you some of Diane's famed sangria to cut through it? I'm sure she's prepared it perfectly." I gestured towards the glass Diane had just doctored. Gerald, preoccupied with his phone, barely grunted in acknowledgement, a dismissive wave of his hand. But he reached for the glass. In one fluid, practiced motion, under the guise of shifting my own drink to make room, I discreetly swapped the glasses. The one meant for me, now innocent, took its place before me. The one intended for Gerald, now contaminated, was firmly in his grasp. I watched him. A slow sip, then another, his eyes still glued to his phone screen. He seemed oblivious, his usual air of impenetrable self-importance unwavering. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of my internal terror. Had I been wrong? Had it just been my paranoia? The thought was fleeting. I knew what I had seen. 45 minutes later, the clinking of cutlery had given way to the polite hum of after-dinner conversation. Gerald, who had been holding forth on the latest mergers and acquisitions, suddenly went silent. A sheen of sweat broke out on his brow, his face paling to an alarming shade of ashen. He pushed back from the table with a violent jerk, his chair scraping loudly across the polished floor, and bolted towards the bathroom. A moment later, the distinct, violent sounds of his illness echoed through the stately home, punctuated by loud retching. Diane's face, usually a mask of composed indifference, drained of all color as she stared at the empty glass Gerald had left behind. Her eyes, wide with dawning horror, met mine across the table. In that harrowing, silent exchange, I knew two things with absolute certainty. My mother-in-law had tried to poison me, and she knew that I knew. I didn't react. I didn't confront her. The other family members exchanged confused glances, murmuring about food poisoning. Haley, my wife, immediately rose, her brow furrowed with concern, rushing to check on her father. Diane stammered, blaming bad shellfish from the caterer, her voice thin and reedy. Amidst the ensuing chaos, the clamor of anxious voices and the persistent sounds from the bathroom, I quietly, almost casually, pocketed the untouched, innocent glass that had originally been placed before me. The world around me seemed to slow, the sounds muffled, as a profound stillness settled within me. Something fundamental had shifted. The anger I felt wasn't a hot, explosive rage. It was cold, deliberate, like a perfectly calculated equation. I wasn't going to let this go, but neither was I going to fight them on their terms. No, I was going to make them face exactly who they were, in a way they could not deny. This was no longer just about me. It was about exposing the truth, not for revenge, but for survival. My name is Julian Mercer. I'm 32 years old, an independent photographer based in the vibrant, artistic hub of Asheville, North Carolina. I'd built my business from the ground up, brick by painstaking brick, through countless late nights and early mornings. My work spanned the spectrum from intimate, emotional weddings that required a delicate touch, to raw, powerful wildlife photography for prestigious publications, to meticulously composed magazine spreads that demanded an artist's eye for detail. It was the kind of work that, if you were truly good at it, and I prided myself on being excellent, not only paid the bills, but allowed for a life lived on one's own terms. And I was good. My reputation preceded me, a quiet hum of respect within the industry. But to my in-laws, particularly to Diane and Gerald, what I did was never enough. It was never a profession, merely a pastime. "How's the little photography hobby coming along, Julian?" Gerald would ask at family dinners, his voice laced with an insincere politeness that barely masked his thinly veiled disdain. He was an investment banker, a titan of industry in his own mind, the kind of man who measured success not in moments captured or stories told, but in square footage of real estate, the number of zeros in a stock option portfolio, and the wattage of a power tie. Every Sunday dinner at their sprawling colonial home was a meticulously choreographed performance of subtle insults and financial interrogations. Diane, with her impeccable coiffure and designer clothes, would fuss over her daughter Haley, with an almost suffocating possessiveness, while Gerald would corner me, his questions sharp and intrusive, dissecting my finances with the precision of a surgeon. Under the gleaming antique table, Haley's hand would find mine, her fingers squeezing gently, a silent, heartfelt apology for her parents' behavior. She knew the sting of their words, even if she couldn't always articulate it or stand up to them directly. That touch was my anchor, a reminder of why I endured these weekly rituals. This particular week, I had been deep in the wilderness of Montana, on assignment for National Geographic, trudging through knee-deep snow, battling biting winds and the sheer exhaustion of tracking elusive bison herds across vast, frozen plains. I had captured images that felt truly transcendent. My cheeks were raw and wind-burned, my muscles ached with a satisfying fatigue, and my memory card was full of raw beauty, images that would not only pay our mortgage for 3 months, but also add another jewel to my professional crown. I was bone-tired, craving nothing more than a hot shower in my own bed. Yet, Haley, her voice soft but insistent, had reminded me we couldn't possibly miss her mother's birthday dinner. "Just a couple of hours, Jules," she'd promised, her blue eyes pleading. "It means the world to Mom." I should have listened to that persistent knot in my stomach, the one that had been tightening since Diane had cornered me in the kitchen. Her eyes had darted around the room, a quick, almost furtive scan, before she handed me that drink. The slight tremor in her fingers as she'd said, "I made it special, just for you," now echoed in my mind with chilling clarity. Something hadn't been right then, a subtle dissonance in her demeanor. I just hadn't known how profoundly wrong it was about to get. Haley and I had met 6 years ago, at an art exhibition in downtown Asheville, where my burgeoning collection of abstract landscape photography was featured. I was just beginning to make a name for myself, navigating the precarious world of freelance art. She was in the final throes of her master's degree in environmental science, her passion for the natural world as fierce and unyielding as my own. We connected instantly, a magnetic pull of shared values and unspoken understandings. She intuitively grasped my fundamental need to capture the world through a lens, to frame its fleeting beauty and brutal honesty. And I, in turn, deeply admired her unwavering passion for protecting it. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, from the intricacies of light and shadow to the urgent realities of conservation. We were two halves of a whole, each complementing and enriching the other. Her parents, however, were an entirely different story. From our very first meeting, a stiff, formal affair held at their country club, Gerald had made it unequivocally clear he had envisioned someone else entirely for his daughter. Someone with a desk job, a clearly defined career path, a guaranteed retirement plan, a company car. Someone, in short, exactly like him. He'd delivered this unspoken message through pointed questions about my long-term prospects and thinly veiled suggestions that Haley might be sacrificing stability for idealism. Diane was subtler, her condescension cloaked in feigned admiration. She would praise my photographs, her voice dripping with an almost sickly sweetness, while simultaneously asking, "When do you plan to settle into something stable, Julian?" A proper profession, perhaps. She would invite me to lavish family functions, only to introduce me, with a slight, dismissive wave of her hand, not as my son-in-law, Julian, but as Julian, the photographer. The way she'd emphasize the word, as if it were a quaint but ultimately trivial pastime, was a constant low, level hum of irritation. For years I had tried, with an almost desperate optimism, to win them over. I'd arrive at their weekly Sunday dinners, armed with impossibly expensive bottles of wine, rare vintages I'd researched exhaustively. I'd bring portfolios of my published work, glossy spreads in prestigious magazines, hoping the tangible proof of my professional success would speak for itself. I'd casually drop names of high-profile clients, people whose names Gerald might recognize from the financial pages. Nothing worked. Nothing, it seemed, could alter their deeply ingrained perception that I was merely a temporary fixture in their daughter's life, a passing phase she would inevitably outgrow, much like a fleeting summer romance. Last Christmas, the casual cruelty of their judgment was laid bare. I had walked into the living room to find Diane on the phone, her voice hushed but clearly audible. "Haley could have married Thomas, you know," she'd whispered, unaware of my presence. Orthopedic surgeon, family money, impeccable pedigree. There was a dramatic pause. Then, with a sigh that spoke volumes, she'd added, "But she chose the creative one." The way she articulated that word, creative, made it sound less like a descriptor and more like a diagnosis, a debilitating disease. It was a sneer cloaked in pity. Gerald was, as always, more direct, more brutal in his honesty. When Haley and I, overjoyed and a little nervous, announced we were trying for a baby, he'd pulled me aside, his face grim. "Children are expensive, son," he'd stated, his gaze unyielding. "A drain on resources. Perhaps you should think about securing a real employment before bringing one into the world. You know, something with a steady paycheck, health benefits, a pension plan." His words were a punch to the gut, a stark reminder that in his world, my passion was a frivolous indulgence, a dangerous gamble with a life. I never told Haley these things. She loved her parents, despite their glaring flaws, despite the way they subtly undermined her choices and questioned her judgment. I didn't want to force her into the agonizing position of having to choose sides between the man she loved and the parent she was, in her own way, still seeking approval from. So, I smiled. I shook Gerald's hand firmly at every visit, maintaining a facade of respectful cordiality. I complimented Diane's meticulously prepared, if somewhat flavorless, cooking. And I kept my thoughts, my hurt, my simmering resentment, locked away behind a polite, impenetrable mask. But there were signs, subtle at first, then increasingly overt, that I should have taken more seriously. The way Diane would, almost invariably, ask Haley to help in the kitchen, "Darling," whenever I began talking about a successful project, a major assignment, or a new client. It was a deliberate ploy, a thinly veiled tactic to interrupt my moment, to ensure I never quite basked in the glow of my achievements in their presence, or the times she would, accidentally, exclude me from family photos. A quick snap taken just before I could position myself, followed by a breezy, "Oh, did we get you in that one, Julian? So sorry." There was the time Gerald, during a particularly strained dinner, had suggested, with a pointed stare directly at me, that perhaps Haley should consider therapy for her impulsive decisions, a thinly disguised jab at her choice of husband. I ignored it all, attributing it to their quirks, their anxieties, their old-fashioned values. I clung to the naive hope that time, with its gentle, inexorable passage, would eventually bring acceptance. I was wrong. Terribly, dangerously wrong. The Friday of Diane's birthday dinner arrived, and I returned from Montana looking like I'd wrestled a bear and lost. My cheeks were raw, wind-burned and aching. But my spirit was buoyed by the memory card, tucked safely in my camera bag, a treasure trove of images that would pay our mortgage for 3 months, a testament to my dedication and skill. I was bone-tired, every muscle in my body screaming for rest, but I forced myself into a steaming hot shower, scrubbing away the layers of dust, snow, and exhaustion. I put on a crisp, ironed button-down shirt, feeling the familiar fabric a comforting armor against the inevitable onslaught, and drove us through the winding, tree-lined streets of Asheville to her parents' meticulously manicured colonial-style home, nestled in the most exclusive part of town. The house itself seemed to exude an aura of unyielding tradition and formidable wealth, its grand facade both impressive and intimidating. Dinner started as normally as these family dinners ever did. Gerald, true to form, held court, bragging about a recent, impossibly lucrative deal he'd orchestrated, his voice booming with self-congratulatory pride. Diane, ever the meticulous hostess, fussed over the intricate table settings, adjusting a fork here, straightening a napkin there, as if her entire self-worth resided in the perfect alignment of crystal and silverware. Haley's older brother Owen, a kind but somewhat timid soul, and his equally polite wife, Vanessa, made polite, innocuous conversation about local events and the weather. I nursed a single beer, the cold, bitter liquid a small comfort, and mentally counted the minutes until we could politely make our exit. Each tick of the grandfather clock in the hall felt like an eternity. After the main course, a perfectly cooked but somewhat bland lamb, Diane announced with a flourish that she had prepared her famous sangria for dessert.
Her famous
Sangria was notoriously strong, a potent mix that usually left everyone feeling pleasantly buzzed and slightly more tolerant of Gerald's monologues. She disappeared into the kitchen, and, ever the dutiful son-in-law, I offered to help carry the glasses. It was a ritual, a small gesture to show I was contributing, that I belonged. That's when I saw it. She was standing by the counter, her back to the doorway, silhouetted against the soft glow of the cabinet lighting. 2 crystal goblets sat separate from the others, distinctively set aside. As I stepped quietly into the kitchen, my footsteps muffled by the thick rug, she quickly, almost imperceptibly, added something from a small, clear glass vial into one of them. It wasn't a splash of fruit juice, or a dash of liqueur, or a decorative garnish. It was colorless, odorless, vanishing instantly into the dark sangria. The vial itself was tiny, designed for discretion. The moment she heard my approaching footsteps, a subtle shift in the air, she tucked it away with an unnerving swiftness, slipping it into the deep pocket of her apron. She turned, her face momentarily flushed, her smile a little too wide, a little too bright. "Oh, Julian! You startled me. I've got this." "Darling," she chirped, her voice unusually high-pitched. Her eyes, usually so composed, flickered with a fleeting, almost manic excitement. Then, with an exaggerated gesture, she picked up one of the goblets, the one she had just tampered with, and presented it to me. "This one's for you. Special recipe for my favorite son-in-law." My throat tightened, a sudden, choking constriction. The blood in my veins turned to ice. She actually did it. My eyes, trained to spot the minutest detail, immediately focused on the drink. There it was, a barely perceptible film. A shimmering, oily slick floating on the surface of the sangria, catching the kitchen light just so. It was almost invisible. But now that I was looking for it, it was undeniably there. It betrayed her. "Let me help you carry these," I said, my voice betraying none of the tremor I felt within. My hand, steady as a surgeon's, reached out and took both glasses she had prepared, the innocent one and the poisoned one. The weight of them in my hands felt immense, the fate of the evening, perhaps even my future, resting precariously in my grip. Back in the dining room, Gerald was still absorbed in his phone, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension, his world shrinking to the glowing screen in his hands. He barely looked up when I approached. "Sangria, sir," I announced, my voice even, almost deferential. With an imperceptible shift of my wrists, a move born of sheer instinct, and a desperate need to avoid disaster, I placed the tampered glass directly in front of him. The other, the untainted one meant for me, I held on to. "Actually," I added, forcing a light chuckle, "I think I'll stick to water with my dessert. All that bison meat this week has me feeling a bit dehydrated." It was a clumsy excuse, but Gerald merely grunted, his eyes already returning to his phone as he reached for the glass. I watched him drink. Every sip felt like a nail hammered into my own chest, a slow, agonizing burn of anticipation. Diane was watching me, a subtle, triumphant smirk playing on her lips, her eyes darting between me and Gerald. She thought she had won. She thought I was oblivious. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the clinking of spoons on ceramic plates and the innocuous chatter of Owen and Vanessa. 5 minutes later, the calm shattered. Gerald, mid-sentence about a golf game, suddenly paled. His robust complexion turned a ghastly shade of green, his forehead beaded with sweat. He stumbled, pushing his chair back with a violent screech, and rushed, almost fell, towards the bathroom. The violent sounds of his illness, retching and groaning, echoed through the house, undeniable and grotesque. Diane's face drained of color as the awful truth dawned on her. The glass Gerald had just abandoned, half empty, stood on the table, a silent accusation. Her eyes, wide with a terrifying realization, met mine across the elegant table. In that harrowing, frozen moment, I knew two things with absolute, chilling certainty: my mother-in-law had tried to poison me, and she knew that I knew. The silent understanding hung between us, thick and suffocating, more potent than any shouted accusation. I didn't react. I didn't confront her. My face remained an impassive mask. I simply picked up my fork and continued to eat my chocolate cake, savoring the rich, dark sweetness with a detached precision. It felt surreal, like a scene from a macabre play, while Haley, her face etched with genuine concern, rushed to check on her father, and the rest of the family descended into a chaotic maelstrom of confusion. Gerald insisting it must have been food poisoning, Diane stammering about bad shellfish from the catering company. I quietly, almost casually, pocketed the untouched, innocent glass that had originally been placed before me. It was a tangible piece of evidence, a silent witness to a heinous act. Something profound had shifted inside me. The anger I felt wasn't a hot, explosive rage, the kind that flares and quickly consumes itself. No, this was different. It was cold, deliberate, a calculated fury that settled deep in my bones, hardening my resolve. I wasn't just going to let this go. But neither was I going to fight them on their terms, resorting to petty squabbles or emotional outbursts. Their game was one of manipulation, control, and veiled cruelty. My game would be one of quiet precision, irrefutable evidence, and unyielding truth. I was going to make them face exactly who they were, strip away their facades, and expose the rot beneath. The following Monday, with a sense of grim determination, I took the untouched glass, carefully wrapped and secured, to Jason, a former client who ran a toxicology lab on the outskirts of town. Jason was a man of few words, precise and professional, a scientist through and through. He raised an eyebrow when I explained the unusual nature of my request. "Personal or professional, Julian?" he asked, his voice devoid of judgment, merely seeking clarification. "Family matter," I replied, my gaze steady, offering no further details. He simply nodded, the unspoken understanding passing between us. He knew better than to pry. 3 agonizing days later my phone rang. It was Jason. His voice was calm, clinical, but beneath it, I detected a hint of concern. "Julian," he began, "there were benzodiazepines in that drink. Nothing lethal, mind you, certainly not in that quantity, but enough to knock someone out for several hours. Might even cause some temporary memory loss, disorientation. Where did you get this?" He paused, clearly expecting an answer. I thanked him, requested a detailed written report, and politely, firmly, ended the call before answering his question. The confirmation sent a chill down my spine, but also a surge of grim satisfaction. I had proof. Irrefutable, scientific proof. That night, as Haley and I sat on the couch, the television a low hum in the background, I broached the subject of the upcoming Sunday dinner. "Hey," I was thinking. I began, trying to keep my voice casual. "I really need to focus on this upcoming exhibition. It's a huge opportunity. Maybe we should skip Sunday dinner at your parents' for a while. Just for a few weeks, until I get through this crunch." Haley's face fell, a flicker of disappointment in her eyes. The Sunday dinners, despite their discomfort, were a sacred ritual for her, a tenuous thread to her family. But she understood my dedication to my work, respected my ambition. "Oh, okay, Jules," she said, her voice a little softer than usual. "I guess Mom will be disappointed. But I get it. Your work is important." I didn't tell her about the test results. Not yet. I needed more information first. More pieces of the puzzle. I needed to understand the depth of the rot, the full scope of their calculated malice, before I shattered her world. As summer over the next 2 weeks, fueled by that cold, deliberate anger, I became a quiet, relentless investigator. My studio became a war room, my computer screen a window into the hidden lives of my in-laws. I delved into public records, consulted private databases, and leveraged old connections from my years as a photojournalist. The first discovery was unsettling. Diane had prescriptions for Xanax, a powerful benzodiazepine from not one, but 3 different doctors in various parts of the state. She'd been meticulously shopping for years, accumulating an alarming surplus of the drug. There were hushed rumors about her in town, whispers carefully buried by the family's influence and wealth. A scene at a neighbor's party where she'd reportedly become erratically aggressive and incoherent after a few drinks. Accusations of stolen jewelry at her exclusive country club. Incidents that had been quietly resolved with hushed apologies and significant financial settlements. Stories her family had worked tirelessly, ruthlessly to bury, protecting their carefully constructed image of pristine respectability. I compiled everything, cross-referencing, verifying, building a meticulous dossier of their secrets and indiscretions. And then I waited. I knew my moment would come, and I needed to be ready. It came, unexpectedly, wrapped in a casual request. "Mom needs some new photos for her social media profile," Haley mentioned one evening, sounding surprised by the request herself. She specifically asked if you would take them, Jules. "Said you have such a good eye." There was an almost imperceptible hint of pride in Haley's voice, a flicker of hope that perhaps, finally, her mother was beginning to acknowledge my talents. My internal alarm bells rang. This was a deliberate overture, a calculated move, a trap. But it was also my opportunity. "Of course," I said, my voice smooth. belying the surge of strategic planning unfolding in my mind. I'd be happy to. The following Saturday, I arrived at their house alone, camera bag in one hand, a sealed manila envelope in the other. The house, usually bustling, was quiet, almost eerily so. Diane was waiting for me in the foyer dressed expensively, her makeup meticulously applied, every strand of her hair in place. She looked like she belonged on the cover of a society magazine, a picture of effortless elegance. "Gerald's at the office, darling," she explained, her voice as polished as her pearl necklace. "Business, you know." She smiled, a confident, almost triumphant smile. She thought she had me alone in her territory, a photographer at her beck and call. "Before we start, Diane," I said quietly, my voice calm, almost detached, "I thought you might want to see this." I handed her the envelope. Her brow furrowed slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing her perfectly serene face. She took the envelope, her manicured fingers brushing against mine. Inside were the lab report from Jason's toxicology lab, clearly outlining the presence of benzodiazepines in the sangria, along with printouts of her multiple prescriptions for Xanax from various doctors, each dated and time-stamped. Her hands, usually so steady and precise, began to tremble as she read. The color drained from her face, leaving her porcelain skin even whiter. Her eyes, wide with disbelief and dawning comprehension, darted from the lab report to the prescription sheets and back again. "This is absurd," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "I would never. We'll both know exactly what happened." "Diane." I cut her off, my voice level unwavering. I watched her closely, searching for a flicker of remorse, a hint of regret. There was none. Only a hardening of her features, a tightening around her mouth. "What I don't know," I continued, leaning in slightly, "is why. Why go to such lengths?" Her face hardened, morphing into a mask of cold, unyielding resentment. The elegant facade cracked, revealing the raw, unvarnished animosity beneath. "You're not good enough for my daughter, Julian," she snapped, her voice low, venomous. "You never will be. A man should provide security, not pictures. A photographer. What kind of future is that for Haley? She deserves stability, wealth. A real family name, not some bohemian dreamer." The audacity of her words, the sheer hypocrisy, was breathtaking. "And drugging your daughter's husband," I asked, my voice still dangerously calm, "provides that security. Is that your definition of parental protection?" "It wasn't going to hurt you," she snarled, her composure finally breaking, a flash of raw fury in her eyes.
"Just make you sick?"
"Make you miss that ridiculous gallery opening you've been talking about for months. Show Haley that you're unreliable, unstable, incapable of handling important commitments. She would have seen you for what you are." The words hung in the air, cold and calculated, exposing the depth of her malice. She hadn't just wanted to incapacitate me, she'd wanted to sabotage my career, to create a narrative of my unreliability in Haley's eyes. I let that sink in, the full weight of her malicious intent settling over me. The silence in the elegant foyer was deafening. Then I spoke, my voice low but firm, each word carefully chosen, imbued with an unshakable resolve. "Here's what happens next, Diane. You're going to tell Gerald exactly what you did. Every detail. Then, you are both going to start treating me with respect. Not because you've suddenly had a change of heart about me. Not because you've magically seen the light. But because the alternative is Haley finding out, in excruciating detail, exactly who her parents are, what they are truly capable of." Diane laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that was utterly devoid of mirth. It was a hollow, empty sound that echoed strangely in the grand space. "She'll never believe you over us, Julian. We're her parents. Her family. She'll choose us. Always." Her eyes gleamed with a cold, desperate certainty. I picked up my camera bag, the weight of it suddenly familiar and comforting. "Maybe not," I conceded, letting the words hang in the air. thick with unspoken possibilities. But she'll believe the lab report. And the prescription records. And the neighbors you've alienated with your unusual behavior. And the country club members who whisper about your kleptomania. Are you willing to bet your entire relationship with your daughter on that, Diane? Your carefully curated reputation. Everything you've worked so hard to protect. I watched the confidence drain from her face, replaced by a raw, naked fear. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. I turned and walked out of the house, leaving her standing amidst the polished grandeur, frozen in the wreckage of her own calculated cruelty. I didn't take a single photo. The satisfaction was immeasurable. For that night, the phone rang, its insistent buzz shattering the fragile peace of our apartment. It was Diane. Haley answered, her brow furrowed, listening intently. A moment later, she turned to me, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and hurt. Mom says. She says you behaved inappropriately during the photo session. Haley stammered, her voice thin, hesitant. She said you were hostile and threatening. She was crying jewels. The moment of truth had arrived. I couldn't hide the truth anymore. Not from Haley, not after everything. There was no going back. With a heavy heart, I laid it all out. I showed her the lab report. Jason's official findings confirming the benzodiazepines. I presented the multiple prescription records for Xanax, each one a stark indictment of her mother's deceit. And then, the hardest part, I scrolled through my phone, showing her years of text messages from Diane, messages that had, over time, become increasingly passive-aggressive, then subtly manipulative, and finally, chillingly hostile, filled with veiled criticisms of my career, our choices, even our relationship. Each text was a small, insidious poison, a constant drip of negativity. Haley read them, her face paling with each passing word, her breath catching in her throat. My mother wouldn't do this. She kept repeating, her voice thin, almost a whisper, but the conviction was noticeably absent. It was a reflex, a desperate clinging to a carefully constructed reality, a futile attempt to reconcile the woman she thought she knew with the monstrous stranger I was revealing. The next day, with a quiet, steely resolve that both impressed and terrified me, Haley confronted her parents. I wasn't there, but I could imagine the scene, the righteous indignation, the immediate denials, the masterful deflection. When she returned home later that evening, her eyes were red, rimmed and swollen from crying, her shoulders slumped in defeat. She moved like a ghost, an ethereal whisper of her former self. My father says it's all a misunderstanding, she said quietly, her voice hoarse, her gaze fixed on some distant, unseen point. He says you're trying to drive a wedge between us because you're insecure about your career. He says you've always been jealous of their influence, our family, that you're unstable. She recounted their practiced narrative, their well-worn tactics of gaslighting and blame shifting. I just nodded, a grim acknowledgement. I had expected nothing less. This was their playbook. What do you think, Haley? I asked, my voice gentle, careful not to push too hard, too fast. She didn't answer. Instead, she crawled into bed, pulling the duvet up to her chin, and turned away from me, her back a wall of silent distress. I lay beside her, the chasm between us feeling wider than ever. I had pushed back, hard, confident in the power of truth. But somehow, in their perverse reality, I had fallen deeper into their trap. Now I was the villain in their meticulously crafted story. And they had managed, with their insidious whispers and manipulative narratives, to plant a seed of doubt in the one person whose opinion mattered most to me. For 2 agonizing weeks, Haley barely spoke to me. She went to her parents' house alone, returning each time with red eyes and a fresh batch of doubts, a new narrative from her parents that chipped away at our foundation. I threw myself into my work, spending long, solitary hours in my studio, the click of my camera shutter a lonely rhythm against the silence, waiting for the storm to pass, for the truth to somehow, miraculously, prevail. 6-7 then, a package arrived. It was small, unassuming, wrapped in plain brown paper. No return address, just my name, Julian Mercer, scrawled across the top in an unfamiliar, looping handwriting. A flicker of curiosity, then apprehension, sparked within me. Inside, nestled among a sparse layer of tissue paper, was a generic USB drive and a folded note. The note was short, handwritten, stark. You should see this. V. A single initial. My mind immediately went to Vanessa, Owen's wife. Why would Vanessa send me anything? What could be so important? My hands trembled slightly as I inserted the drive into my laptop. The folder that appeared contained video files, dozens of them, each time-stamped. My heart leaped into my throat. Home security footage, from Gerald and Diane's house. I clicked on the first file, dated the night of Diane's birthday dinner. The video was grainy, a little dark, but undeniably clear. There was Diane in the kitchen, moving with that familiar, almost theatrical grace. I watched, my breath held, as she quickly, deftly, added something from a small vial into one of the sangria glasses. Then, my own entrance into the kitchen, my calm demeanor as I took both glasses from her. And then, the dining room footage. Gerald, oblivious, drinking from the tampered glass. It was all there, laid bare, irrefutable proof. But there was more, so much more. The footage continued after Haley and I had left. Diane, her face contorted with rage, screaming at Gerald, her voice a sharp, shrill sound even through the poor audio quality.
You idiot! You drank the wrong glass!
I told you which one was Julian's. Gerald, his face flushed, yelling back. This isn't the first time you've done something like this, Diane! You're out of control! My blood ran cold. This wasn't just confirmation of Diane's actions. It was evidence of a pattern, a history of malevolence. And damningly, it revealed that Gerald knew. He hadn't just been a victim of circumstance. He had been an accomplice, or at least, a silent partner in her schemes. I watched that footage 3 times, each viewing peeling back another layer of deception. The implications were staggering. Then, I clicked on the next file. 2 days after the dinner, Diane and Gerald were in their living room, arguing about me. Their voices, though still somewhat muffled, were distinct. He knows what you did, Gerald said, his tone grim. He saw you, Diane. So what? Diane replied, her voice chillingly devoid of remorse. It's his word against mine. Haley will never choose him over family. Her real family. And if she does, then she's not the daughter I raised. Her voice hardened, becoming colder, more menacing. Don't worry, Gerald. I've already started talking to her about their marriage problems, planting seeds of doubt. Gently, subtly. By the time I'm done, she'll be filing for divorce and thinking it was her idea. I shut my laptop, my hands shaking so violently I could barely grasp the lid. My stomach churned, a sickening mixture of horror and fury. This wasn't just about me, about discrediting my career or undermining my marriage. This was a systematic, calculated effort to control Haley's entire life, to isolate her from anyone who didn't fit their narrow, suffocating vision of her future. They had been doing this for years. A lifetime, perhaps. I called Vanessa immediately, my voice a strained whisper. Why did you send this to me? I asked, the words tumbling out, raw with emotion. Because they did the same thing to me when I married Owen, she said quietly, her voice tinged with a familiar pain. They tried to break us up for 2 years. Said I wasn't good enough, not from the right background, not suitable for their son. They constantly undermined our relationship, planted doubts, created friction. It almost worked. I almost left him. Why didn't you tell us? I pressed, the pieces of Owen's unwavering loyalty to his parents suddenly clicking into place. Owen doesn't know the extent of it, she admitted, her voice thick with suppressed emotion. Hey, he worships his father. He believes everything Gerald tells him. I've tried to tell him. I swear. But he thinks I'm paranoid, that I'm making things up, that I'm just sensitive. I couldn't watch them do it to someone else. Not again. Not to you and Haley. Her voice broke on the last word. The full, horrifying scope of their manipulation unfolded before me. It wasn't just me. It wasn't just Thomas. It was a pattern, a legacy of control. You guess it, the next day, a terse text message from Gerald appeared on my phone screen. "What should talk, man to man. No wives." The implicit command, the arrogant assumption of control, grated on me. But I knew this was my opportunity. My next move. I met him at his exclusive country club, the kind of place where hushed conversations and power deals were made over expensive scotch. He was waiting in a private room, an air of studied nonchalance about him, a crystal tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. "Julian," he began, his voice surprisingly smooth, almost conciliatory. "Families are complicated. My wife, she can be difficult, certainly. Very protective of her children. But she means well. Her intentions are always good. Drugging someone means well, Gerald." I asked, my voice cutting through his practiced platitudes like a razor. His eyes flickered, a momentary tremor in his carefully composed facade. He waved his hand dismissively, as if swatting away a pesky fly. "A misunderstanding, Julian. Diane takes medication for anxiety. She probably just mixed up the glasses." A momentary lapse. He was trying to pivot, to control the narrative, to dismiss it as a trivial oversight. "I have the security footage, Gerald," I stated, my gaze unwavering, holding his in a silent battle of wills. "I saw her. I saw you too. After we left, your argument. Your admission that this wasn't the first time. Your wife's plan to drive a wedge between Haley and me, to make her divorce me and think it was her idea." His face changed instantly. The smooth, avuncular mask dropped, replaced by something cold, hard, and calculating. His eyes narrowed, glittering with a dangerous, reptilian intensity. "What do you want?" he hissed, his voice dropping, almost a growl. "Money. Is that what this is about? I always knew you married Haley for financial reasons. I saw it in your eyes the first time we met. A greedy opportunist, latching onto a wealthy family. I want you both to leave us alone." I said simply, my voice low but firm, refusing to be baited by his familiar accusations. "Stop trying to convince Haley I'm not good enough. Stop interfering in our marriage. Stop planting your insidious seeds of doubt. Your control over her ends now." Gerald leaned forward, a predatory gleam in his eyes, a mocking smile playing on his lips. "You think this is the first time we've dealt with someone like you, Julian? People who want to take advantage of our family, who aren't good enough for our daughter. We've dealt with your kind before, and Haley will come home where she belongs. She always does. She's ours." He chuckled, a low, unsettling sound. "Ask her about Thomas. Julian, ask her about the fiancé before you." My blood ran cold. The air in the room seemed to congeal. "What are you talking about?" I managed, my voice barely a whisper. "Haley was engaged before she met you." He purred, savoring my shock. "Nice guy. A doctor. Solid career, good family background. But we didn't like his background. Not quite what we envisioned for our daughter. So, we fixed it. Took us 6 months, but we convinced her he was wrong for her. Planted a few seeds of doubt about his fidelity, his commitment. Showed her a few anonymous tips. She broke it off, came home crying to Daddy, just like a good girl should. History repeats, son." He smiled, a truly chilling smile, entirely devoid of warmth. On the drive home, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, I called Haley's college roommate, Bethany, a woman I had met only a few times but whose warmth and openness I remembered. "Bethany," I began, my voice strained, "I need to ask you about someone." "Thomas? Thomas," she exclaimed, a sharp intake of breath. "Oh God, Julian, that was awful. He was perfect for her. Truly perfect. He adored her. But her parents, they convinced her he was cheating. Planted evidence, even. Anonymous emails, fake photos. He tried to tell her the truth, he pleaded with her. But by then she didn't trust him anymore. They had poisoned her mind against him. She was heartbroken. We all were. It was a nightmare. The pattern was terrifyingly clear now, a cold, calculated strategy of control that stretched back years, encompassing every meaningful relationship Haley had ever had. This wasn't just about me, or about my career. This was about absolute, complete control over their daughter's life, a relentless, suffocating grip that had crushed anyone who dared to stand in their way, anyone who encouraged Haley's independence. They had done it before, and they would continue to do it, unless someone finally stopped them. I didn't confront Haley immediately after the call with Bethany. The full weight of what her parents had done, the sheer extent of their manipulative reach, needed to be processed. Not just by me, but by her. Instead, I started systematically gathering every single piece of evidence I could find, building an irrefutable case. I reached out to Thomas, who was, understandably, initially reluctant to speak with me, his old wounds still raw. When I explained the full, horrifying situation, the patterns of manipulation, the truth of Gerald's confession, he relented. He sent me old emails between him and Haley, meticulously curated to show how her parents had systematically undermined their relationship, planting false clues, fabricating stories, slowly chipping away at Haley's trust. I contacted other ex-boyfriends, young men who had mysteriously drifted out of Haley's life. I spoke to old friends of Haley's, people who had once been inseparable from her, only to vanish without a trace. A sickeningly consistent pattern emerged. Anyone who encouraged Haley's independence, anyone who challenged her parents' narrative, anyone who truly saw as her, and not just their expectations, was gradually, subtly, pushed out of her life. Vanessa, a quiet hero, provided more security footage from the in-laws' house. Clips showing Diane and Gerald, unaware of the camera's reach, discussing their plans for us, for Haley. In one chilling clip, Gerald's voice, smug and confident, echoed through the living rooms. Once they divorce, we'll convince her to move back home. She can run the foundation, meet suitable men. We'll find her a real husband this time, someone appropriate. My resolve hardened with each new piece of evidence. I compiled everything onto a single, encrypted USB drive: the toxicology report, the prescriptions, the text messages, Thomas's emails, the testimonies from former boyfriends and friends, and the damning security footage. Then, I orchestrated my own dinner party. I invited Owen and Vanessa over to our apartment, carefully, deliberately, without telling Haley the true purpose of the evening. It was a betrayal of sorts, keeping the secret from her. But I knew, deep down, that she needed to see it for herself, unfiltered, undeniable. The evening started innocuously enough, with polite conversation and a delicious meal. Over dessert, as the coffee brewed, and the quiet hum of conversation settled, I connected my laptop to our living room television. "There's something you both need to see," I said, my voice calm, but with an underlying tremor of anticipation. For the next hour, we sat in stunned silence, illuminated by the glow of the screen, watching the damning footage unfold. Haley sat motionless beside me, her face pale, a silent scream frozen in her eyes. Owen, usually so stoic, kept shaking his head, muttering, "That's not my parents, it can't be." Under his breath, his voice laced with disbelief and a growing horror. When it was over, the screen dark, the silence in the room was deafening. Haley finally turned to me, tears streaming down her face, her eyes wide with a profound grief that went far beyond mere sadness. "Why didn't you tell me sooner, Julian?" she whispered, her voice raw with anguish. "Because I needed you to see it for yourself, Haley," I replied, my voice gentle but firm. "All of it. Not just what they did to me, or what they tried to do, but what they've been doing to you your entire life." To Thomas, to your friends, to everyone who didn't fit their twisted vision of your perfect life. Owen, finally breaking his stunned silence, stood up, his face a mask of furious denial.
This is bullshit, Julian. You've edited these videos.
My parents wouldn't do this. Vanessa, her own eyes brimming with tears, gently touched his arm. They did it to us too, Owen, she said quietly, her voice full of a pain she had carried in silence for years. Why do you think they suddenly started liking me after we had James? Why do you think they suddenly approved of our marriage? She paused, her gaze locked on her husband's shocked face. Because a grandchild meant they had leverage. A new way to control us, to keep you close. The color drained from Owen's face, leaving him ashen. His mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. You never told me. He finally whispered, his voice broken. I tried, she replied, tears finally escaping, tracing paths down her cheeks. So many times. But you wouldn't listen. You always said I was paranoid, that I was imagining things, that they loved us. Later that night, after Owen and Vanessa had left in a stunned, emotionally shattered silence, Haley crawled into bed beside me. She didn't turn away. She simply lay there, her head on my chest, tears silently soaking my shirt. I need time to process this, Jules, she said softly, her voice still raw, muffled against my skin. But I believe you. And I'm so sorry I doubted you. It was enough. More than enough. It was the first step on a long, arduous path, but we would walk it together. Seize the next morning, the phone rang, its cheerful trill a jarring contrast to the somber mood in our apartment. It was Diane. Haley put her on speakerphone, her eyes meeting mine in a silent, knowing exchange. Darling, I was just thinking, Diane's voice chirped, sickly sweet, laced with an almost palpable condescension. You should come stay with us for a while. Your father and I are so worried about you. Marriage is hard, darling, and sometimes a little separation can give you clarity, help you see things more clearly. The thinly veiled manipulation, the subtle attempt to sow further discord, was evident in every syrupy syllable. Mom, Haley interrupted, her voice firm, clear, and utterly devoid of the usual hesitation. I've seen the videos. Silence. A profound, suffocating silence stretched across the phone line, broken only by the faint hum of the speaker. Then Diane's voice, suddenly strained, laced with a forced incredulity. What videos, darling? I have no idea what you're talking about. The security footage, Mom. Haley continued, her voice gaining strength, each word a hammer blow. Of you drugging Julian's drink. Of you and Dad plotting to break up my marriage. Of you talking about how you'd manipulate me into divorcing Julian, and thinking it was my idea. Another pause. Longer this time, a strangled gasp. Then Diane's voice sharper, harder, attempting to regain control. Haley, darling, whatever he's shown you has been manipulated. You know Julian has always been jealous of our family, our success, our love for you. He's unstable, dear. He's trying to drive a wedge between us. The familiar playbook played out once more. Stop. Haley's voice was firm, unequivocal, cutting through her mother's practiced lies. It was the voice of a woman who had finally found her resolve. We're coming over tonight, all of us. Owen, Vanessa, Julian, and me. We're going to talk about this. As a family. No more lies. No more secrets. Just the truth. She hung up, her hand shaking slightly as she lowered the phone. Haley turned to me, her eyes still red, but now burning with a fierce determination. They'll deny everything, Jules. They'll try to turn this around on you, make you the villain. I nodded, a grim smile touching my lips. I know. So, she asked, a spark of the old Haley returning to her eyes, what's our plan? For the first time in weeks, a genuine, unburdened smile spread across my face. I think? I said, my voice calm, confident, it's time your parents met the real me. The one who doesn't just take beautiful photos, but who also knows exactly how to tell a story. And I have quite a story to tell. That night, we arrived at Gerald and Diane's house, a united front. Owen and Vanessa were already there, sitting stiffly in the opulent living room, their faces pale, their eyes radiating a mixture of fear and defiance. I carried my camera bag, heavy with equipment, and a small, innocuous-looking USB drive. Gerald, ever the patriarch, seemed outwardly confident, an air of amused condescension about him. "I understand there's been a misunderstanding." He began, his voice smooth, an attempt to brush everything under the rug with a wave of his hand. "No misunderstanding, Gerald," I interrupted, my voice clear and steady. I ignored his surprised glare and calmly, deliberately, began setting up my tripod in the center of the living room. The click and whir of the camera, usually a welcome sound, seemed to echo with ominous intent in the hushed room. "I'm documenting this conversation," I stated, my gaze sweeping across each of their faces. "For the family archives." For Diane objected immediately, her voice sharp with outrage. "This is private family business, Julian. You cannot film this." "Exactly," I agreed, meeting her furious gaze without flinching. "Family business. And I'm family, even though you've tried very hard to change that." The camera lights illuminated their faces, stark and unyielding. For the next 2 grueling hours, we laid it all out. Every betrayal, every manipulation, every lie. The poisoned drink, the elaborate scheme to sabotage my career, the systematic emotional abuse. Thomas's story, then the accounts of the other ex-boyfriends, the friends who had mysteriously vanished. We exposed the insidious pattern that had shaped Haley and Owen's entire lives, the invisible chains that had bound them to their parents' will. Gerald and Diane, of course, denied everything, their voices rising in a crescendo of indignant outrage. They called me unstable, manipulative, a liar, a gold digger, desperate to destroy their family. But with each frantic denial, I played another clip, showed another email, read another testimony. Their faces grew paler, their denials weaker, their carefully constructed facades crumbling around them. The irrefutable evidence, presented with a methodical precision that mirrored Gerald's own business tactics, chipped away at their defenses, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. Finally, Haley stood up, her eyes still red from crying, but her voice resonating with a newfound strength and clarity. "I love you both," she began, her voice trembling slightly, but firm. "You're my parents. But what you've done, what you've been doing, is unforgivable. You don't get to control my life anymore. You don't get to choose who I love, who I marry, or how I live." Owen, visibly shaken but now standing beside his sister, nodded, his voice hoarse but determined. "We're adults. We choose our own partners, our own paths. You've had your chance to guide us, but you chose to manipulate instead." Diane started to cry, not from remorse, not from regret for her actions, but from the raw, desperate realization that she was losing control, that her carefully constructed world was shattering around her. Gerald, usually so composed and formidable, just looked stunned, as if he couldn't comprehend that his children, his carefully molded creations, were defying him, openly rebelling against his authority. The silence that followed Haley's declaration was heavy with the weight of shattered illusions. As we prepared to leave, the atmosphere thick with the debris of a broken family, I handed Gerald the USB drive. "This contains everything," I said, my voice calm. The final card played. "The footage, the emails, the testimonies. It's yours to keep, for your family archives." He looked at it suspiciously, his eyes narrowing. "What's that supposed to mean, Julian?" "It means that I'm not going to ruin your reputation by sharing this with anyone else," I replied, my gaze firm, holding his. "That would hurt Haley, and I would never do that. Her peace is paramount." I paused, letting my words sink in, then delivered the final, definitive blow. But if you ever try to interfere in our marriage again, if you ever try to manipulate Haley, or speak against me, or question our choices, copies of this drive will go to every member of your country club, every one of your business partners, and every single person in your precious social circle. Your carefully cultivated image, your entire legacy, will be irrevocably tarnished. For the first time since I'd met him, since that very first patronizing handshake, Gerald looked at me with something resembling respect. It was a cold, grudging respect, perhaps, but respect nonetheless. "I underestimated you, Julian," he said, his voice flat, devoid of its usual arrogance.
Yes,
I said simply, meeting his gaze, a quiet victory blooming in my chest.
you did.
6 months passed, marked by a cautious distance that felt both liberating and, at times, strangely poignant. Haley and Owen, united in their shared trauma, began attending therapy, diligently working through the deep, seated damage their parents had inflicted. It was a slow, painful process of unpacking a lifetime of manipulation, but they were committed. Diane and Gerald, true to my unspoken threat, largely kept their distance. Occasional, terse text messages would arrive, empty pleasantries, holiday greetings, but they respected the boundaries we had established. The constant pressure, the insidious interference, had ceased. Then, just before the holidays, an elaborate invitation arrived. A fresh start, it read in flowing script. They were inviting us all to dinner. Haley, ever the hopeful one, wanted to go. "They're still my parents, Julian," she said softly, her eyes pleading. "And they're trying." "Aren't they?" I agreed, though I wasn't naive enough to believe they had genuinely changed. Old habits, especially deeply ingrained manipulative ones, rarely vanished overnight. But I recognized Haley's need for reconciliation, however fragile. When we arrived, everything seemed on the surface perfectly normal. Diane had prepared a lavish feast, a culinary masterpiece that spoke of desperate efforts to impress. Gerald, usually so remote and critical, was surprisingly charming, asking about my latest photography projects with what appeared to be genuine, if fleeting, interest. He spoke of the market, but also asked about light, composition, subject matter. It was a strange, unsettling truce. After dinner, as the remnants of dessert were cleared, Gerald invited me into his study, a cavernous room filled with leather-bound books and the scent of aged wood and success. He poured me a scotch, the amber liquid glinting in the crystal tumbler. "Julian," he began, his voice smooth as silk, settling into his expansive armchair. "I've been thinking about your career. Photography is, well, it's been good to you. Very good, considering. But have you ever considered diversifying, expanding your horizons?" He paused, a calculated look in his eyes. "I could bring you into my firm, junior partner track. The salary would be substantial. A real career." I took the glass, the cool crystal heavy in my hand. But I didn't drink. The offer, coming from him, felt less like an opportunity and more like a final attempt at absorption, at control. "Why would you do that, Gerald?" I asked, my voice calm, unwavering. He smiled, a practiced, almost professional smile. "Family? Of course," he said smoothly. "And I respect how you handled the unpleasantness. You protected my daughter, Julian, while standing your ground. That's what a real man does. That's admirable." The words were a calculated attempt to flatter, to buy my loyalty. I set the glass down on the polished desk, untouched. "I appreciate the offer, Gerald," I said, my voice steady. "But no." His smile tightened, a barely perceptible tremor in the corner of his mouth. The mask was beginning to slip. "Julian, be reasonable. This is an olive branch. A way for us to move forward, to put everything behind us." "No," I repeated, my voice firm, final. "It's another attempt at control. You can't buy me, Gerald. And you can't stand the fact that Haley loves me exactly as I am. A photographer. A man who defines his own success." The facade finally shattered. His face twisted, a flash of pure, unadulterated fury in his eyes. "Don't be a fool, Julian," he hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Everyone has a price. Everyone." I stood up, pushing my chair back with a soft scrape. "That's where you're wrong, Gerald," I said, looking down at him. "And that's why you'll never truly understand your daughter." I walked back to the dining room, leaving him in the silent, suffocating expanse of his study. As I entered, Diane was showing Haley old photo albums, a nostalgic smile on her face. "Look at these, darling," she was cooing, her voice cloyingly sweet. "You were so happy when you lived at home. So carefree." Haley caught my eye across the room. She could see it from my expression, a subtle shift in my composure. That something had happened in the study. I gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, and she understood. Haley stood up, closing the photo album with a soft thud. The sudden movement drew everyone's attention. "Mom, Dad?" she announced, her voice clear, resonating with a quiet triumph. "Julian and we have something to tell you." She paused, her eyes, sparkling with a mixture of joy and defiance, locking with mine. "We're having a baby. I'm 3 months pregnant." The shock on their faces was genuine, raw, and utterly profound. For a brief, blissful moment, the carefully constructed facade of Gerald and Diane crumbled completely, replaced by pure, unadulterated surprise. Diane recovered first, rushing to embrace her daughter, tears, real tears, for once streaming down her face. Gerald approached more slowly, his gaze darting between Haley's glowing face and my own. "Congratulations," he said stiffly, his voice flat, his usual composure utterly shattered. "Thank you," I replied, my voice steady. Then, lowering my voice so only he could hear, a quiet promise woven into the words. "This child, Gerald, will never be a pawn in your games. I promise you that." His face hardened, but he nodded, once a flicker of something akin to grudging acknowledgement in his eyes. He understood the message. He understood the new, unbreachable boundary. As we drove home that night, the city lights blurring past the car window, Haley squeezed my hand, her fingers intertwined with mine. "They'll never change, will they?" she asked softly, the question hanging in the quiet darkness of the car. "No," I said honestly, meeting her gaze. "They won't, but they'll have to accept that we have, and that we define our own lives now." As Savers 3 weeks later, a certified letter arrived from Gerald's attorney. Inside, there was no note, no apology, no flowery words of congratulations. Just a stark, legally binding deed to a house, our house, the one we had been renting for years, now unequivocally ours. Along with it were legal documents establishing a generous trust fund for our unborn child, set up with no conditions, no strings attached, no hidden clauses. It was a clean, irrevocable transfer of assets. It wasn't an apology, Gerald wasn't capable of that, but it was an acknowledgement, perhaps the only one he could give, that we had won. Not by fighting his way, but by refusing to. Our daughter, Eliza, was born that summer, a tiny, perfect bundle of hope and new beginnings. We named her after my grandmother, a woman of immense strength and quiet resilience. When Diane and Gerald came to the hospital, they brought extravagant gifts, but maintained a respectful distance, their usual overbearing presence notably absent. They cooed over the baby, took photos with a reverent air, and left without attempting to offer unsolicited parenting advice or financial lectures. Months passed, and our relationship with them settled into something resembling normalcy, a new equilibrium established on our terms. They never apologized for what they'd done, but they stopped trying to control Haley's life or undermine my career. The silence, in this case, truly was golden. One evening, as I was editing a particularly challenging series of photos in my studio, the familiar click and whir of my computer a comforting backdrop, Haley came in, carrying a sleepy Eliza nestled against her hip. "My mother called," she said, her voice thoughtful. "She wants us to come for Christmas." All of us. I looked up from my computer screen, considering the proposition carefully. The old wounds still throbbed, a dull ache beneath the surface, but the sharp pain had dulled. "What do you want to do?" I asked, leaving the decision entirely to her. "I think we should go," she replied, her eyes meeting mine, a quiet determination in their depths. "But with conditions." She outlined them clearly. "We stay at a hotel, not their house. We leave when we want to leave. No unsupervised time with Eliza." I nodded. "Sounds reasonable. Very reasonable." She sat down beside me on the worn leather couch, gently bouncing Eliza, who stirred and let out a soft sigh. "You know, Jules?" Haley mused, her voice soft, contemplative. "I used to think that success meant making my parents happy, getting their approval, meeting their impossible expectations. Their definition of a perfect life was always the one I was chasing." She looked down at our daughter, Eliza's tiny hand curled around her finger, then back at me, a profound shift in her gaze. "And now I know it's about making choices I can be proud of. It's about standing by the people I love. It's about building a life that feels authentic and true, on our own terms." 2 weeks before Christmas, a large, glossy envelope arrived from Gerald's office. Inside was a sleek, impeccably designed brochure for his company's annual report. My photographs were featured throughout sweeping landscapes, candid portraits of employees, striking architectural shots of their headquarters. It was the kind of work I did, on my own terms, without his interference, without his guidance. There was a brief note, tucked inside the front cover, scrawled in Gerald's familiar, precise hand. "Hired the best photographer I know. Thought you'd want a copy. Gee." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was something else entirely. Respect, perhaps. An acknowledgement that I was successful on my own terms, not his. I didn't call to thank him. We both understood that this wasn't about gratitude. It was about recognizing the new boundaries, the new reality that had been forged in the crucible of conflict. That spring, after months of planning and hard work, I opened my own gallery in downtown Asheville, a dream realized, a testament to my perseverance. At the grand opening, the space was filled with a vibrant energy. Haley stood proudly beside me, Eliza perched contentedly on her hip. My own parents, who had flown in from Oregon, beamed with pride, their eyes reflecting the immense journey we had traversed. Friends, clients, and fellow artists filled the space, admiring the images I had captured over the years, each one a piece of my soul. Gerald and Diane came towards the end of the evening. They didn't stay long, their visit brief and circumspect. Diane held Eliza briefly, her movements cautious, under Haley's watchful eye, then handed her back without fuss. Gerald shook my hand, his grip surprisingly firm, and nodded at the photographs with what appeared to be genuine, if reserved, approval. He left without making any suggestions about how I should run my business, without a single critical remark. It was a small victory, but a significant one. As we locked up the gallery that night, the scent of fresh paint and possibility hanging in the air, Haley turned to me, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Do you think they've changed, Julian?" I considered the question carefully, the echoes of the past still present, but softened by time and distance. "No," I said finally honestly. "I don't think they've changed who they are at their core." I continued, a quiet certainty settling over me. "They've accepted that they can't change us. And sometimes, Haley, that's enough." Later, as we sat on our porch, watching the first stars emerge over the majestic Blue Ridge Mountains, Eliza asleep in her crib upstairs, I realized something I had never fully articulated before. I hadn't won by playing Gerald and Diane's game, by stooping to their level of manipulation and deceit. I had won by refusing to play it at all. I had stood my ground, protected what truly mattered, my integrity, my relationship, my family, and built my life according to my own definition of success, not with schemes or coercion, but with honesty, quiet persistence, and an unwavering commitment to authenticity. In the end, that was the most satisfying revenge of all. Living well, on my own terms, with the family I loved safe and whole beside me.